In the meantime, back at home here, at least 15 states from California to Massachusetts reporting slightly elevated radiation levels in water. Now, the Japan disaster, just for some context here, is now expected to be the costliest in history with damages of $300 billion. That's followed by a quake in Japan, the Kobe quake back in 1995, and Hurricane Katrina topping the top three most costly natural disasters. Paul Carroll is Program Director of Plowshares Fund and has worked on nuclear waste issues for the Department of Energy and for Congress. Paul, let's start off with the levels of radiation we're detecting here at home, because our viewers have a lot of questions about that, about the long-term effects. If we continue to see radiation levels, not just today, but in the weeks and months to come, what does the buildup do? Is there such a thing as radioactive buildup?
Well, you ask a very good question. The nature of radiation is not very well understood when it comes to long-term exposure at low levels. And that's why when we talk about risk, what we can say is any additional exposure to radiation exposes or increases your risk of getting sick, of getting cancer, of getting thyroid disease. What we can say is exactly how much and at what duration. So the fact that we've picked up slightly increased levels of radiation in the United States doesn't necessarily mean that it's coming from the Fukushima accident in Japan. It's sort of a question of, well, if you went looking for something in your backyard, you might find it. And so I suspect, until we know more, that these readings may or may not be coming from Japan. So
we have limited knowledge, as you mentioned. We don't necessarily know if it's going to be dangerous, but when do we get worried?
Well, the findings of plutonium in the soil at Fukushima should always be of concern. Plutonium is very dangerous stuff, and so we should always be on alert and scrutinize these findings and these readings. However, having said that, we would also expect to see some plutonium found around Fukushima because we know that radiation has been released. We know that steam was released earlier when the explosions happened. What we need to understand better, and unfortunately this is going to take more time, is precisely the makeup of those radionuclides, how much, what intensity, and if and when this is stabilized,
right,
a full assessment of how much.
And that question of when it's stabilized, it's still a question that we have almost every single day now, Paul, and it's been going on for more than 2 weeks. What can you just tell us about the progress? Because we keep on, it almost seems sounding the red alert when it comes to the Fukushima plant, but at this point it's starting to all sort of sound the same. So what should we be watching in the days ahead?
What we should be watching is continued readings and measurements about radiation, what type of radiation, and where it has traveled. Is it only in the soils immediately around the vicinity? Is it getting into surface and groundwater? What we have at this point, I would say, is a little bit more good news than bad. The first 10 days of this crisis were just bad news after bad news, explosions, fuel melting. We do seem to be on a trajectory toward better news, but we're not out of the woods yet. When we do get out of the woods with respect to the spent fuel and the reactors, what we then need is sort of a Captain Kirk calling Scotty in the control room and saying, all right, Scotty, I need to know exactly what's wrong with our ship. And that's what we need to wait for. It's very frustrating, but we need to have solid measurements, confidence in those measurements, and really a full damage assessment.
All right, certainly a lot more to this story, as you so appropriately point out, Paul. Thank you so much for your expertise today. We look forward to talking to you again.
Happy to be here.
Yeah,
Thank
interesting.
You.